Hey folks, today on Free Field Training we are looking at the Rookie Handbook. It is billed by the author as a quick reference guide for calls for service. Now if you're watching this live on YouTube, please put some comments and questions down below to talk about, especially topical comments about the book. So we have something to discuss back and forth with you. I love being able to talk with the audience about what they think about the presentations we're doing here and to be able to answer their questions. I got the book right in front of me. We can go right into it and answer your questions on the spot if you give them to me in the live stream. All right, so the Rookie Handbook, the author says it's a quick reference guide to calls for service. The author is Xavier Wells. He's a police officer down in Texas. I don't think it's a quick reference guide for calls for service, but it does have a lot of very good information in it that I think would be very helpful for new and aspiring police officers. Not in the middle of calls for service, but before they ever get to those calls for service. So there's some good stuff, there's some bad stuff, and there's some reasons that I think those two things are in there, and we're going to get into all of that. Before we get too far into it, I got a few notes. We've got things coming up on the website pretty soon, so check out the website. I'm going to post up on Instagram. If you don't follow me on Instagram, go follow me on Instagram. But I'm going to post up on Instagram when these things come to pass. I have everything I need. It's just a matter of me getting in there and updating the website. I've got window decals. You guys have seen window decals up on the Instagram before, car window decals. We're going to have those up for sale at freefieldtraining.com/merch. We're also going to have some flashlights that have come in for review that, although they're good, I just don't have any use for. So I've had bad results with trying to sell them on eBay because apparently people don't understand how flashlights work on eBay. And I've had some issues back and forth with them. So we're just going to sell them on the Free Field Training website at like a deep dive discount. You know, you're talking $250, $270 flashlights for like $100 or $50. And we also have patches. I've still got a couple of the larger patches. I'm thinking about ordering some smaller, maybe some nylon patches. Put some stuff down in the description. Tell me what you want to see as far as merch is concerned next, and we'll see where we can go with it. I'm also thinking about going on a Teespring. Teespring has sent me a lot of emails lately about selling t-shirts. It might be an easier way than me ordering a whole bunch of t-shirts. So all that's coming up with the website. So let's get into the Rookie Handbook, and I want to get in and start off with the good. Now, when I read through the Rookie Handbook, and it's not that long, it's only about 90 pages. When I read through it, the one thing that struck me is I've written this before because this is the training task book for when we do field training. A lot of this is formatted. Here, I'll grab a random section here for you. Disturbance calls. And in here, it just gives you titles and bullet points, things to think about, things to do on these calls. So for disturbance calls, it says business customer disturbances, officer safety concerns, objectives, and outcomes. And one of the great things about this book is that it's objectives and outcomes based. The author wants you to understand not there's a flow chart for what we need to do in these circumstances, but here is the outcomes. This is what you're aiming toward. So you can tailor your own tactics based upon what's going to get you the outcome that you're looking for. So it's a lot of a senior officer's advice about the way you want the call to end and a little bit about how to get you there. That's the good. The bad, even though it's clearly written by somebody who knows what they're talking about and it's objectives based, there are a couple of things that I think could be improved in the book and some things that aren't really things that anybody could write a book anywhere in the country without there being issues with. For instance, terminology issues. You're going to read this book and some of the terminology that's used in the book is just not going to carry over to the area you're working in or you're trying to work in. Our terminology is not perfectly identical across the country. There's thousands of agencies, and so some of the terminology gets kind of lost in translation. Bro advice in the book. And by bro advice, I mean things like, here, I found a good example here. At the very beginning of the book, it says advice, and it's just a general advice section. You can see up there. And the first piece of advice, general advice about being a patrolman is never run the victim. This might be just a geography thing, and it might be an agency size thing, and you're going to see that a lot with this, like I said about the good and the bad. I hear that from people, never run the victim, and that was something that I heard from some people when I first started. And the idea was, well, you don't want to alienate the victim by running them, and they pop with a warrant, and now you're messing up this other investigation you're doing because they pop with a warrant. And what I found is that advice comes a lot from people that aren't really interested in solving problems and finding stuff. If we've got the victim of some criminal offense, let's say it's a domestic, and the victim comes to us with, oh, he beat me up. And that person, she pops with a warrant. And the warrant's for criminal damage from 4 months ago, and she needs $100 to bond out. It doesn't necessarily derail our entire issue. We can settle the issue we have at hand and then deal with the warrant. Okay, we're either locking them up or we're not. She's either going to sign complaints or she's not. And we say, hey, listen, you've also got this warrant. Now listen, we're going to be cool with you, but you got to come in, you need $100 to bond out. Or whatever. If you're where you're at, you need to call a bail bondsman, you need to get bonded out, you need $1,000. We'll work it out. Because someone pops with a warrant, if it's not a big thing and you're required where you're at, like I am, I have to execute all warrants when somebody comes back with a warrant for a criminal offense. It doesn't mean that we have to derail the investigation, because you don't have to be mean to everybody. On the flip side of that is, if it's a very serious offense, let's say it's a domestic, and I run the female involved because she's the victim, and she pops with a warrant for homicide, isn't it better that we found out? Instead of finding out, we go back to the station, we go to type our report, we run her then and find out, oh, well, she had a warrant for homicide, now we're going back and find her? I don't agree with the don't run people. I think that comes from a lot of people that aren't interested in finding stuff, and I think that's unfortunate. There's not a whole lot of that in there, but I do see it. I see a lot on YouTube, a lot on the internet. People give out that bro advice type of stuff. Hey, it'd make it a lot easier if you just don't run everybody. Well, it does make the job easier, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you're being more effective at doing that job. And the other thing under the bad, and I'm going to get to the good stuff, the really good stuff up ahead here. Don't get too angry at me down in the YouTube live stream comments. But the book is clearly written by someone that the department has a lot of resources available, and that it's not by somebody who's worked in a super high crime area. So while all the information is good, there's some areas that I really wish the author had put a lot more into, like a boatload more into. And one that jumped out at me was the section on murder and homicide and suspicious deaths. So we're going to look at that really quick. So I'm going to show you that, and then I'm going to show you a section I think was done really, really, really well. So the section on death and murder calls here. It says, deceased person, officer safety concerns. He always starts off with officer safety concerns, which is good. We get them right out of the way in the beginning. It says, deceased person, officer safety concerns. Secure the scene. Now, securing the scene, he puts in pretty much the front of every one of these. It just means make sure everything's safe where you're at. Well, that doesn't quite do it with a murder investigation. Now, let's compare and contrast this with his section on crashes, which is fantastic. Crash call. Regular crashes. Officer safety considerations. Okay? Here it is. In case you want to freeze frame that and take a look at it. He's got 5 officer safety considerations for crashes. In there are placement of the emergency vehicle, donning your reflective vest, requesting medical assistance for injured parties, requesting additional support that might be necessary to deal with the crash safely, clearing the crash off the roadway as soon as possible, and there's sub-bullet points to all of those. If we go into the murder investigation part, there's one, secure the scene. Now maybe Xavier Wells hasn't worked a whole bunch of murder investigations. It's entirely possible. A lot of guys can go an entire career and maybe only have one homicide investigation. Some have no homicide investigations the entire time that they're working. And this might be something that's just handled by detectives where he's at. That's entirely possible, because every agency does things differently, and different parts of the country do things differently. But on a death or murder investigation, where I'm at, secure the scene, that's not it for officer safety considerations. Because what we have when we have a death investigation, especially if it's out on the street, somebody gets shot, secure the scene doesn't mean, hey, make sure I don't see any offenders around, we're going to look around and make sure everything's all right. You have to post somebody up with a long gun in that area to make sure nobody comes back and shoots at the crime scene investigators while they're out processing the scene. It's a big, big deal. Officer safety when you're on a homicide investigation, or even just a suspicious death where you don't know whether it was a homicide or not. Like, there's a whole lot more officer safety considerations for that. Bloodborne pathogens, for one. And then the murder and death calls section goes 1.5 pages. So you can see what's typed in there, and then you can see all my comments down below of things that I would have added in. So I would have added in checking cameras, which wasn't in there, noting obvious evidence and making sure that it's not disturbed. Specifically, casings, blood, tire marks, notes left on scene, which although he kind of goes over it a little bit, like, hey, don't touch anything, including weapons, and just don't touch anything till the crime scene investigators get there. You need to know where that stuff is at, and maybe even mark that stuff so that when the crime scene investigators are there, when the detectives get there, when your supervisors get there, you can point it out to them and make sure other people don't disturb that stuff that's on scene. That's stuff you'll learn actually doing it. Put the suspect information out on the air, statewide, district-wide, citywide, whatever your largest radio broadcast length is. You're going to want to put that information out if it's a homicide. Because you may come on scene and have someone be like, oh, it's a red car and it went southbound on 4th Street. All right, what did they look like? You get a good description? Put that out, because other people would love to know who the offenders are and where they're going. It's a homicide investigation. You can't assume that all deaths and homicides are going to be, somebody that died in their apartment. Crowd control is a huge officer safety concern on homicide scenes where I'm at. It's unusual to have a homicide where we don't have at least 20 or 30 people gawking for the entire time we're out on scene. Logistical issues. Even before you get into the investigation with going and looking for cameras or canvassing the area to try to get information for detectives, you have logistical issues you have to deal with. If the scene's at night, you have to go get lights. You have to light this scene up so that you can see what's going on, and so the crime scene investigator can do their job. There's weather issues. If it starts raining, you have to make hard decisions, tough big boy decisions about whether you recover the stuff that's laying on the ground because it's going to get washed away if you take pictures with whatever camera you have to preserve the scene and the way you saw it, or if you wait for the crime scene investigator. And that goes back to the logistical issues, having to go get tents and canopies and stuff to preserve the scene. There's a lot of stuff that goes into a homicide investigation. I don't think 1.5 pages in here really did it justice. However, section on crashes. If you're going to be a highway patrolman, if you want to be a trooper, the section that he does in this book on crashes, chapter 5, is fantastic. Lots of good information, lots of officer safety information, lots of stuff on the objectives and outcomes, identifying and interviewing drivers and occupants, identifying and interviewing witnesses, making sure that all the drivers exchange information, but then making sure that information is accurate so you're not going and fixing things after you're done with the call. That's fantastic stuff. He even sections it off into high-speed roadway crashes, things that are important with those. Aircraft and train crashes, something I don't ever deal with here. Apparently he has, because he's got some good information on here. Hazardous material crashes, another thing that I get a hazmat and I go, yep, I'm far enough away, call the fire department. Apparently he has to deal with it for a while before the fire department gets there. Awesome information on hazardous waste and material crashes. Lots of stuff in here that people that are going to work in a rural area and people that are going to work a lot of motor vehicle collisions are going to absolutely love. And there's great stuff in here on a lot of topics. Vehicle fires, 911 hang-ups, pedestrian in the roadway calls. There are some absolute lifesavers in this book. We'll take the pedestrian in the roadway calls, for instance. Here, I'll hold it up so you can see there. Officer safety considerations for a pedestrian in the roadway on a high-speed roadway. Secure the scene, consider vehicle placement. Vehicle placement's very, very important for officer safety, especially on highways, 2-lane highways, big, busy, major streets. Donning PPE, not only a reflective vest, but rubber gloves. You people that are in the roadway are very often intoxicated. They might have vomited or urinated all over themselves. It's very important. And then the final bullet point that he has here on pedestrian in the roadway traffic hazards. If subject is naked, wait for backup. That's the type of thing you learn the hard way on the street, or you're lucky enough to have somebody tell you before the first time you get into it. But I wouldn't have thought to put that in this book. It's very, very important, though. how to deal with situations that most people would be completely taken aback by is a really positive thing in this book. He puts little nuggets of information there, like, hopefully this sticks out in your brain. Hey, if you show up to the call and somebody's naked, you may not want to jump right in there to figure out what's going on. If they're running and jumping around or they're acting drunk, people often start stripping clothes off when they're really highly intoxicated and on all sorts of stuff, and you probably don't want to get yourself into a situation where you might have to fight with them before you get back up on scene, if you can avoid it. So that is an awesome little nugget of information. It's full of little things like that. So, theft calls. You can freeze frame that if you want there. Theft calls, it says, with the subject in custody. Officer safety considerations, secure the scene, make contact with the subject in custody, immediately frisk, detain, and identify. Perfect, right? Do not ever take the loss prevention's word that the suspect is unarmed. You want to talk about something that you learn most of the time the really hard way? I can't count the number of times that I've had people, loss prevention says, oh yeah, we searched him. You better go over there and research that person, homie, before you go put them in the car. And we pull a knife out of their sock, or, drugs out from between their toes, or all sorts of weird stuff people have on them. Loss prevention is not the police, and even if they were, don't ever take someone else's word for it that the person is searched, unless you're required to by policy. And some places won't allow males to search females, things like that. But if you're allowed to search the person and you're transporting them, don't ever take someone else's word for it that that person is adequately searched. I don't care if the detectives got there and they pat this person down and make sure they don't have any weapons before I transport them to the station, and then TAC got there and pat them down when they talk to them. Before they get in my car, they're getting pat down again. And that's the type of really good advice that is just all over the inside of this book. And I think that's why it's a good primer for new and aspiring cops. It might not be a guide for service calls. Good tagline for it. But it might not be a perfect guide for service calls where you're going to be like, oh, I have a theft call. Let me read up on it before I go in here. But it's a great thing to read before you get on those calls. If you're going to the police academy next month, you may want to put a read through this. If you just graduated the police academy, you're starting FTO next week, you might want to put a read through this. You are a law enforcement explorer and you want to learn a little bit about how you should be handling the scenarios when you go to these training conferences and stuff, when you go to your competitions, give this one a read. It's pretty cheap. It's on Amazon. There's a link down in the description below for this on Amazon. I think it's less than 15 bucks. So it really doesn't hurt you to get a copy of it. I've got this copy, flip through. I'm going to take a bunch of live stream comments and questions here. Again, the little eye in the corner, there's a link down in the description. You can go see what people asked back and forth, what they wanted me to talk about in the book. And we'll be flipping through the book, I'm sure, and going into sections and answering people's comments and questions. So until next week, you guys be safe. Take care of each other. Hey, thanks for watching Free Field Training on YouTube. While you're here, why don't you go check out one of our other videos, or you can head on over to the Patreon and see how you can get your name put on the videos like these fine folks listed over here. There's also some exclusive content on Patreon that just shows you kind of behind the scenes like you're seeing now. We'll see you guys next time.